All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson Mackay.
And today's guest is David Jackson. David is a Master Instructor with the Oxygen Advantage, working now as a Breathwork coach. He's a former professional rugby player, accredited UKSCA Strength Conditioning coach, NASM performance, enhancement and corrective exercise specialist, and he's on a mission to make breathwork a normal part of our everyday lives. Having retrained his own breathing after a brain injury in 2013 forced him to retire from professional rugby, he's become passionate about helping others change the way they breathe to improve the way they feel, move and perform. He believes that in breathwork there is something for everyone, having worked with professionals seeking better stress management or those suffering with anxiety to professional athletes looking to improve performance and everything in between. David knows how your breath can impact all areas of your body and mind, which is why he is so passionate about helping others use breathwork to fulfill their true potential. Having felt the benefits personally, he wants it to share with others. Please note there's a short couple of minutes where there's not the greatest of sound quality, so apologies, but it soon rectifies. In this interview, we discuss how your breathing affects your health as a whole, why breathwork can be a secret sauce to win more, think better and live healthier, how to level up your breathing right now, and so much more. And now, let's get to the interview. But for people who maybe don't recognise the name, how would you introduce yourself and what you do? Because you've been a rugby star and now you're shaping lives with the breathing, etc. But how do you sell who you are to somebody?
Well, I played professional rugby. To sell as a rugby star is definitely a step too far if you ask anyone that I played with. My snapshot of me, David Jackson. A lot of people know me as Jacko. That was my nickname when I played rugby. I'd played 13 years of professional rugby and had a brain injury in 2013 that ended that. I then sort of retrained in personal training, strength and conditioning, started to learn an awful lot more about the body. I've always loved coaching, and so sort of going into a coaching realm, utilising still experiences from sport was a bit of a passion. But I've always loved science as well. I've got my sort of education background is like I did materials engineering at Loughborough University, and when I was looking at ways to continue my rehabilitation from my brain injury, exploring the effects that head injuries have on your breathing and dysfunctional breathing patterns, that when I sort of did the assessments, it was like, yes, I came up as a severe asthmatic on some of the tests, and I was like, I've never had asthma in my life, and at that point I felt reasonably fit. I was running like a 20-minute 5K, which is breaks no world records, but it was like an all right pace for a 5K of an old guy that's finished playing rugby, and but I just felt like there was still some work to do. The way I describe it is it felt like I had the handbrake slightly on in the car, and it was like I'm moving, but like there's something in the background holding me back, and something in the background sort of breathing. This started coming up. It started to become a bit more popular, and I was looking at it going like, well, it ticks that box of like it's going on in the background, and you do that many repetitions of it. You do 20 to 25,000 repetitions, and I was thinking of relating that to like something in the gym like squats, and you go, well, if I did 25,000 bad squats, even if I didn't have any weight on, that'd be bad for my knees. Like, what's that doing to my body? How do I know? It started asking these questions like, well, how do I know if I'm doing a good rep or a bad rep when I'm talking about my breath? And so I started to explore it, and then got down the rabbit hole of the oxygen advantage, literally fell in love with Patrick McKeon from the oxygen advantage, did my training with him. Sort of the effect it had on me, and then just combined with my, I guess I feel when I'm coaching, coaching feels very natural to me, coaching and mentoring. And so that's a role that I've been able to play with the oxygen advantage now. And to actually answer your question, which is how do I describe what I do now? I describe it as we look at, or we try to improve or change the way that you breathe to improve the way you feel, move, and perform. And that's literally because the breath is part of a lot of these autonomic systems within the body and influences things like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your autonomic nervous system, so your hormonal system, then it literally can do those things. But it's the one of those systems that's easiest for us to just choose to do something with. I describe it like this to a lot of people when I'm trying to simplify things, and I'm simplifying things just literally for myself. Like, how simple can I make it for me to understand? And that seems to help other people. I'm a fairly simple guy. It's one of the things I like about breathing is it's so simple, yet the benefits or the implications of it or the impacts of it are quite profound or quite impactful. But it's simple to do, so that's a winning formula for me. It's simple, but has quite a big impact. I say that you either in life, we complicate life a lot of the time to try and make ourselves. I complicate life, or I try to make my, and this will resonate with some people. Others will be like, no, that's not me. But we try to make ourselves feel more important by the stories and narratives that we tell of how important I must do this next thing. But when you break life down to the simplicity of breathing, you're either breathing in, breathing out, or holding your breath. You aren't ever doing anything else. You might be doing something as well as one of those three things, but you're never not doing one of those three things, because otherwise you're dead. Life is your breath. You can have food, you can have water, but if you haven't got your breath, then you're dead. So, and that's not morbid. That's not me being morbid or anything. That's just being like, it's just true. That's just how it is. And I personally quite like the simplicity of that and going, okay, well, everything else is just like additional stuff I'm just throwing on top that makes things complicated. And when you have the opportunity and you have the choice to let it work on autopilot, which is great because it means you can't be thinking about your breathing 24 hours a day. And certainly when you're asleep, you can't think about it. But you can set some tone, set some intention, set some good habits with your breathing to be more efficient so that your body is more efficient in the way it delivers oxygen and it uses carbon dioxide buildup. But also, when we're able to be more efficient with our breathing, there's just less overall stress or work for the body to do. And you can choose to do something with your inhale, your exhale, or your pause. And it really is, parts of it really are that simple. That doesn't take into account the mechanics of how we breathe, but those things they do link together and go hand in hand. Apologies, I've just spoken for about 7 minutes. When you asked me,
worries.
In a snapshot, what do you do?
No, I love that kind of passion. I mean, it's something. When I looked at your site, I was kind of like, oh yeah, breathing, it's great because you can do box breathing to sort of calm when you're stressed, and I mean, we probably like brace better if we breathe like 3D rather than just try to hold our breath when we're, say, like powerlifting or whatever. But when you really get into it, like your site, you talk about like breaking down CO, like dealing with CO2 better. You talk about how to prep better, how it works, your brain, your biochemistry, and you're like, whoa, there is actually a ton of stuff here. Why do you think like it's not really sort of taught? Why is this kind of like a secret formula that some athletes and coaches do rather than it being widespread?
Yeah, I think it will become widespread and is becoming more widespread. Like I've done quite a bit of work gone back into rugby, just purely had some people that I know that are still involved in like the sort of professional rugby realm, and then some more endurance sports like triathlon and Ironman. And then also there are sports where it's a bit more, so mixed martial arts, boxing, stuff like that, where they are, particularly in that UFC fighters and that they're aware that breathing has a huge impact. And I think it's, I've never punched anyone in my life, so I'd be absolutely petrified to go inside the octagon. But I have done a little bit of work with some fighters, and one thing that they, and we all know this about the breath, even if we don't realize we know about it, because I feel like it's intuitively built into us as a bit of a safety mechanism. It's like your brain looks out for certain things. If you see someone like panting, like you know there's something not right with them, like they've lost their breath. And if you saw someone that was breathing like that and they'd not just they weren't wearing their like flipping training gear or cycling gear or whatever, and you're like, what is the matter with you? Are you okay? Like, what's happened? You just know that is a sign of distress, and that is a sign of like, this person is struggling. And when the fighters are in the ring, as soon as they see the opposition or their opponent, lose their breath and go to that mouth panting, they know it's game over. And you too, as that person, know it's game over. So you feel yourself lose your breath and get to fast panting through the mouth. You also know it's game over, and you're just like trying not to now get knocked out, whilst the other guy knows it's knockout time. And that's not to do with, I think that's more of an intuitive sort of nervous system type of thing that we know that from looking from a perspective of trying to look out for safety. And you speak to anyone in the fighting game, and they know that for sure.
I mean, because you do have you've got a great video there where you were, I think it's the Manchester top team you're in seeing, and you're kind of explaining to them about how a lot of them, they're probably all used to sort of holding their breath when they throw punches or going balls to the wall, and are burning out through anxiety, and even just like some basic kind of stuff. You can see how it improves sort of a performance, and kind of getting them to calm and to kind of hold their breath, and how it affects their cognitive behavior. And I think it was when you were getting them to count steps when they were getting fatigued, and how that affected, if they held their breath, of how much they could remember compared to, and it was like, whoa, this kind of really hits home. I'll add it to the show notes. I don't want to spoil it for people. But I mean, it was just kind of I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was amazed at the ability for people who would come in and go, yeah, I'm super fit, I run marathons. But jiu-jitsu is a completely different kind of cardio challenge. So is MMA, so is boxing, all these sorts of things. And that's what I'm kind of interested in, with how we can use our breath control to fix that. But why do people think that they can't change their breath control? That it's automatic, can't do anything about it, it just happens. How do you even start working with somebody to realize it can be adapted, it can be changed?
I guess interesting. A lot of the people that I end up working with, you can imagine, they want to work with you because they appreciate that it can do something. So you're not having to fight that. But occasionally, when you're working with a team, there might be a number of people within that team that are on board, but then there'll be some other people that are skeptical for sure. So I would literally. I'll try to explain a few things in the very, 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 very simply. If you go, well, what do you breathe in, and what do you need to? What does your body need? What's it asking for? It needs oxygen, it needs air, and you go, well, how about I help you get it in more efficiently? Would that be good? And it's like, oh yeah, it's difficult to argue with that very, very simple statement. When you're taking air in, does it feel nicer when we do it like this? And it's like, yeah. And then we might play around with some breath holds where we're getting a lot of buildup of CO2, and that stimulus to breathe gets really strong. And then we teach you some techniques to be able to overcome that a little bit more different, or look at ways to make it harder or make it easier. So we effectively have some opportunity to play with the breath and play with or feelings of what CO2 in the body feels like and how we can manage airflow better and go, how did it feel like this compared to this? And it's like, oh wow, it's probably one of the best sessions I've done actually with a group of rugby players, and where there's a massive dude who was like a bit, you could tell he was a bit skeptical, but he was game to doing it, but he was a bit skeptical. And we did something and he was just like, shit, man, like this is actually like, do you know what I mean? You could see it was like he felt it, he'd done it. There's some really nice stuff around just using, we appreciate that our lungs are housed by the ribs, and your rib cage needs to expand in order for you to increase the volume inside your thorax. And we talk about this, the ribs being connected into the spine, and then your shoulder blade being sat on your rib cage. And we can go, well, we can influence how you breathe will influence the position of your rib cage. Will influence how much your ribs can expand, can mobilize, can articulate, which will affect your shoulder blade because it's sat on your rib cage, and will affect your spine because it's connected. The ribs are connected into the spine. And we can do a few breathing techniques where we use the breath and use moving those ribs with the breath to help mobilize around the spine, the shoulders, and it's like you can gain some immediate range of motion. Your respiratory center, in your brainstem, you got the pons, medulla, and midbrain, and how we breathe. We can do some like forceful inhalations and exhalations, which will excite those different parts of the brainstem that will elicit an increase in flexor or extensor tone. So we can use the breath from a neurology perspective to get some changes in range of motion, sort of more globally with the body as well. And when you get someone to just do something that takes like 2 breaths, say, and then they like all of a sudden, I don't know, their shoulder internal rotation has changed massively, or the thoracic rotation has changed massively. It's like, oh, this is doing so. Like, if you can get someone to feel a change, then that's how when I'm talking about coaching and mentoring other coaches in these sort of areas, that's the thing I'm talking about. Like, what can we do to make them feel a difference, sort of in a very short space of time, to get that buy-in? Ultimately, we've got these little things and quick wins that we get, but ultimately, when we're thinking about improving someone's efficiency and improving someone's ability to down-regulate, looking at improving someone's just like foundations of breathing, and their very importantly their tolerance or sensitivity to carbon dioxide, which is the primary thing that the brain, that respiratory into the brainstem is monitoring as the primary stimulus to breathe, because of the effect the CO2 has on the pH of the blood. That is going to take a little bit of a longer term, but getting the buy-in in the short term allows us then to keep them on board and work on through these things. There's also some recovery stuff, like we talk about that post down regulation stuff, where we'll take a very simple marker like respiratory rate, how is someone breathing in terms of the pace and cadence that they're breathing at, and then just talk them and guide them through some down regulation breathing, and just see an effect that has on bringing their whole system down and bringing the respiratory rate and heart rate down. And also then, how do you feel, and what's the level of saliva like in the mouth, and just giving them some markers to be able to go, yeah, I feel a bit different, I feel more relaxed, or I feel however it is that they feel. And then they've got some other markers to tag onto that. Oh yeah, I can feel loads more saliva in my mouth. Like, what's that about? And then, well, it's linked to the rest digest response. You're shifting towards more of a relaxation or parasympathetic state. And I feel like at the moment, a lot of within the sporting context, because we can talk about managing stress and anxiety and that type of stuff as well, which I have some experience in. But from a sporting context, it feels like the people are quite keen at the moment to talk about the nervous system. Not that they didn't used to in the past, but I hear that a lot, sort of more, that maybe it's just the circles that I'm in. But yeah, they're sort of talking about nervous system and down regulate and recovery and parasympathetic. People seem to be quite on board. That's quite trendy at the moment, if it's possible for the nervous system to be trendy.
It's definitely like it's a kind of chase of the buzzwords, isn't it? It's they tell you like, use this for a keyword, use that for a keyword, and you're like, well, no, I'd rather talk about.
Get that on the Google. Get that in the title. Nervous system.
I mean, because that's something I have noticed. It's like, you say to somebody, it's like, sit up because you're affecting your breathing, and you'll say to somebody, do this, do that. because if you're stressed, like count your breaths and it'll calm you down, and people go, yeah, okay. Was something that was kind of taught to you when you were in rugby? Did you what was the kind of?
That's what I was going to say. Actually, when you asked a good question, you were sorry. I tend to go a bit off course. Yeah, no, you were saying about like, why aren't we teaching this? Or I've actually working with a company that go into schools and work on like use movement as a way to help kids with mental health. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is like, why are we not teaching kids some of these very, very simple, basic, like, mechanics of breathing, understanding a little bit of like cadence or the biochemistry of it. We don't have to explain to them complicated. I've got this one, so I've devised some 6 different exercises for them. That's that the teacher is able to take these and do them with the kids. And they've got these different. They've got like a parkour one. They've got a running one. They've got that various different ways of movement that allows them to engage with. Just understanding themselves better. And this is like primary school kids, and a little bit of like being positive about mental health. They didn't have anyone doing breath, and I was like, I'd love to be involved in that. Anyway, one of the exercises is called ninja breathing. I was doing it with a nephew at the weekend, where it's like being quiet as a ninja. You got to be quiet as a ninja, and then like we're doing it, and it's like, but I can hear you. Like if you're breathing, if I can hear you breathing, like you're not being a ninja. Ninjas, I said to him, one of the first things in ninja school that we get taught is we have to breathe silently, then we move silently. And that just instantly, so it was like, right, close your mouth and breathe silently. Because when you breathe silently, you breathe slowly. And now he doesn't care whether he's breathing slow or not. It's like he just wants to be a ninja. And that in itself, we can, in our day-to-day lives, close our mouth, put our tongue to the roof of the mouth and breathe quietly or silently in and out through the nose, that will be life-changing for tons of thousands of millions of people probably. So yeah, why is it not? When I was playing rugby, no, the closest thing we got to any sort of coaching on breathing was, fitness session, like body language being important, show good body language, don't have your hands on your knees and that type of thing. And, it would be like, put your hands on your head and like take some big breaths in. That would be as close as we got to any sort of advice on breathing, because no one was aware of it. And no one was looking at it. And when I go into say like a rugby club now, it's still coming across as something that's pretty new, even though some of the research has been going on for 20, 25 years and some even more. There's more research happening now in sports, that you mentioned about like the breath holding with the boxers. There's like some nice breath holding studies been done in like 2018 in rugby, like for repeat sprintability, just having an increase in repeat sprintability test in 4 weeks by a factor of 10. So like 2 groups, one improved by one group improved. One group that was allowed to breathe normally. They did a 4-week trial. They were allowed to breathe normally during a 40-meter sprint, and they improved by 6%. And they were like, well, that's like a normal improvement you'd expect because we did some training. Well, the group that were told to hold their breath after an exhale and did the exact same training, but just holding their breath after the exhale, so having a greater buildup of CO2 and a greater drop in oxygen, so more hypoxia and more hypercapnia, they increased by 60%, like a factor of 10 greater in a 4-week study. And all they did was hold their breath. That was Warren's 2018 paper. They've done a similar one in basketball. So they start to replicate and get similar results. So replicate it in different sports with like different. In basketball, they weren't doing 40-meter sprints. They were doing like a multi-change of direction, like short sprints. But getting similar results from just holding the breath. So that's one technique that's outside of like our normal day-to-day breathing, but it's utilizing understanding the physiology of what's going on with our body when we're doing something like a repeat sprint, and understanding how the breath, or not breathing, holding the breath, could give us some greater results from doing exactly the same activity.
Sorry, my mic had decided to go into some mute there for some reason. Because it's certainly come up into other chats I've had where, we've been speaking to like Josh Settlage, and he was telling a story about how Mark Bell came in while he worked with him, didn't speak to anybody, just sort of nodded his head, and he went up and said, you've been a bit quiet, what's up? And it turned out he had the tape across the mouth, and he was just using nasal breathing. And he was like, oh, and he said it helped him stop. Josh said it helped him stop snoring. They go in and they'll do rounds at jiu-jitsu with the tape across the mouth because they want to learn to breathe properly. And I've noticed since I've been watching a lot of your videos how noisy a lot of people breathe, how a lot of people are breathing out their mouth when they're tired. And I see them like shallow breathing. I see them try to, I need to get my breath back. Okay. And they go, like they take that deep breath and you're like, that's not really helping, and it's like you feel like you're into this sort of secret code, like when you find out these sorts of things. And I know it's just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm like, this is amazing. And it's like some sort of secret password you've been given. But what if you had to break it sort of down? Are there sort of key factors like posture and all that like affect our breathing?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not. I don't want. I know. I guess sometimes it can probably, and I hope I try to not make it seem like any sort of like mystical, magical thing, because it's just our breath. It's just something that we're all doing, and it's just understanding a few simple things that are going to allow us to understand how we can use it to our better capabilities. And I think one thing to understand is just because it's automatic doesn't mean it's optimal. That's a good phrase. I've not said that before. Write that one down. Just because it's automatic doesn't mean it's optimal. And then there was another one. Just because it's the brain, or not good. We have to remember that the brain will always go for the path of least resistance.
Mm.
What's easiest, and that doesn't mean it's most efficient. So the path of least resistance, when we're talking about airflow coming in and out of, the air can only come in and out of a couple of different holes in your face. It's got your mouth or your nose. You're not breathing through your eyeballs or your ears. So your mouth is going to provide a lot less resistance than your nose. So we have to appreciate that the brain is going to opt for that in terms of ease of airflow. And then we have to be having an appreciation of that. When I go to nasal breathing, and also depending on if you're doing something like jiu-jitsu, you might be had your nose smashed across your face and you've got a deviated septum, we've got these types of things to deal with as well. But the nose is going to provide about 50% more resistance. Now, when we're used to using the nose is well conditioned or has never been deconditioned, we should be breathing through the nose. There's 30 different functions of the nose it shows it's designed for breathing, none of which the mouth has. The mouth is designed for eating, talking. I've said before, to people, well, if the nose isn't for breathing, what the hell is it for? And they'll go, smelling. And I'm like, smelling, really? Smelling isn't life and death. Like, you wouldn't have prime real estate right in the middle of your face just for smelling. There's the filtration system in it, nitric oxide in it. It's a vasodilator, antiviral. That resistance slows down our breath, which helps with oxygen uptake into the blood, helps with oxygen delivery from the blood into the tissues. So we have to understand that there's how we get it into the lungs, stage 1, how it gets from the lungs into the blood, stage 2, and how it gets from the blood into the tissues. And I'm not trying to make this any more complicated than it is. It's just those three things paired up with understanding that being automatic doesn't mean it's optimal, and that the brain will always go for the path of least resistance. We can just start to understand that, well, how I get it in, rather than getting it in shallowly, is that the right word? But, rather than being an upper chest where air isn't getting to the lower portion of the lungs, that's going to be inefficient. Why? Because gravity pulls blood to the bottom of your lungs. Yeah, and by design, because of that, you have the greatest density of alveoli at the bottom portion of the lungs. Like, oh, well, that makes sense. I need to breathe deeper. And deeper meaning breathing lower down, not necessarily just bigger. So depth. I need to get air into the lower portions. That's going to come from the diaphragm being the main driver of our of our breathing and good rib articulation. You already mentioned what you mentioned earlier, about breathing from lower down and breathing three-dimensionally rather than sort of shallow vertically. And then when we breathe through the nose, some of that nitric oxide is going to help with oxygen uptake into the blood. It helps the blood vessels dilate. And then the speed at which we're breathing at, if we can breathe slightly slower and allow CO2 to build up, that's important because carbon dioxide increases circulation by letting blood vessels dilate. And really importantly, carbon dioxide is the catalyst that allows oxygen to be released from red blood cells so that it can actually get into tissues where it needs to be. Now, within all of that, we've also sort of need to just layer in that if I'm struggling, the other thing to add into that, that's what I was going to say about efficiency, is the speed at which you breathe is also plays an effect on your efficiency in terms of the amount of air that you're getting in, rather than in one breath in like a breathing cycle of like, just take a respiratory rate of like a minute. That every breath that we take, it sounds like a song, doesn't it? Every breath you take, you lose
it
about
is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I just
so I'll be watching. What was it? I'll be watching your.
I'll be watching you sleeping now. It's you lose. So every breath you take, you lose about 150 milliliters of air in dead space. So if I breathe fast, panting, not only are that's not deep, so it's not getting air low down, it's staying high up, so transfer is affected. It's not very big either, so the total volume of each of those breaths is quite small, and the speed at which it is means every breath you're taking there those 150 milliliters of air getting lost in dead space keeps adding up. Whereas if I can take a bigger, so a larger volume and slower breath, and proportionally as I slow it down, that breath gets bigger, the total amount of usable air coming into my lungs across a minute or across a set period of time increases. And the slower breath allows me a better chance to actually get the air deeper into the lower portions of the lungs. That helps with that oxygen transfer into the blood. And that slower is going to allow for a little bit of CO2 build up to allow oxygen to be released. So I'm ticking all of that stuff I've just said. I'm just ticking boxes by actually taking some larger, slower breaths being driven from the diaphragm. Now, typically, when we breathe with the nose, it helps us to connect to the diaphragm a bit more because the nose provides a bit more resistance. There are times when people can't manage the airflow through their nose and it becomes too stressful. They can't get enough air in. It's too slow. And we've got some options. One is fight against it and actually build up your ability to do that, hone your efficiency and improve your carbon dioxide tolerance, which some of it will be doing this and some of it will be some breath holding, some of it will be some breathing light practice away from training. But in the instance when it's getting too much is we can switch to mouth breathing, but just try to understand all those things we just mentioned, but just use your mouth to do it. So the problem with the mouth breathing is when we allow the mouth just to be wide open with very little resistance, it goes to that shallow, fast breathing, which we described as being inefficient for a number of different factors. Just make the mouth smaller and try to still provide some resistance, but that you can manage, that allows you to drive with the diaphragm air low down and allows you to take those larger, slower breaths. And, when we're talking about managing airflow and you're breathing for improving exercise performance, like that's the key in the simple things that we can do. Can you drive airflow in and manage airflow in through from the diaphragm, driving it low down? Can we take larger, slower breaths? And some of those rib mobilizations I was mentioning about before, that will help those ribs widen a little bit easier and come together a little bit easier to actually increase a little bit that lung capacity potential alongside that. So it's stuff we can layer in and build this on top. But essentially, when you're not training, breathe through your nose quietly like a ninja. And when you are, manage that airflow, breathe with your diaphragm from low down, but take larger, slower breaths to stay in control.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
No, it certainly makes a lot of sense, and it's quite amazing
It's
how
not complicated, really. When you hopefully it doesn't come across like it isn't complicated when you break it down like that.
because it's when you actually think about it, and you see people like who maybe done their first 5K run, and they're like you're saying, they're bent over and they're like try to catch it with the mouth open, and
you
then
never
you say,
catch your breath like that, and it's like we almost know. And I like what you said. If you go, yeah, this seems quite obvious, doesn't it? Like, and I think that's the job of us people, those of us that are trying to, coach and bring this element of breathing into sort of whether it is in the sporting world or whatever world it's we're trying to reach into. That the reaction should be exactly as you did. I hope of just like, we're actually just sort of makes logical sense, because it should make logical sense. It's something that we just. Ultimately, it's something we've got to do. You've got to breathe. Why not do it a little bit better?
But I mean, see, I suppose that's part of the thing, isn't it? It's like people come out of the womb breathing perfectly, or, well, hopefully, if they're sort of like a healthy baby at the time. But we kind of you see people who've got like hunched over shoulders, they've got terrible posture, they've, the guys who go and work out just the disco muscles in the gym, so
we've all been there.
So they've got like a bad setup, and you see people like, especially now working from home, about posture, and a lot of people's gone to shit basically. What kind of physical kind of problems are you seeing with, like, what affects it? Is it like bad posture, and how is bad posture affecting it? Is it our diets? Is it our lack of getting out into the sun to kind of, what's causing this kind of like anxiety, bad breathing, stress? Like, what are you seeing clients coming to you with in a range of problems?
I mean,
I know it's a bit of a big question.
Yeah, it is, and it'd be completely disrespectful of everybody's human body to suggest it's one thing, and it's not one thing. But there are a few things that could be all interplaying together, and hopefully this can sort of also, again, like sort of rationally make sense that. Just one thing of like, part of the stress response is the mouth panting breathing. Part of the stress response, what do you do when you're stressed? You don't lie on the floor with your arms wide open in a very, an open posture. What do you do when what's part of the stress response? Part of the stress response is the rounded shoulders, like closing in, flexion patterns, basically, to protect vital organs. So just when someone's in what's driving poor posture? Is it a lot of time seated? Yeah, I'm sure being seated is playing into that. But what about the level of stress that people are under from just not being able to manage their nervous system, not being able to manage their own diaries, or not being able to manage their workloads, or not, there's a whole range of things that are making people more stressed. The news, like, the media, like, there's loads of things that make us more stressed. When someone is more stressed, they will have more tension and flexor tone in the body. That's just like part of the stress response. Now, that will impact our breathing the same way a lot of times seated will impact our breathing, because when you're sat down, and particularly when you're stressed, you're going to be hunched over. Ultimately what's causing those tension relationships within the body to be upset? The brain is in charge of how much flexor and extensor tone you have around any of your joints. There's nothing else that's creating that tension, as far as we're aware. Like, it's your brain firing neurons that's making muscles contract. So when we're seated, like, it can affect our breathing in terms of we're not sat in a nice upright posture where we've got ease of movement of the ribs, and particularly those lower ribs where the diaphragm is situated. And so the brain is very clever. It's far cleverer than we are. It doesn't just because breathing is compromised doesn't mean it doesn't let you die. It just goes to that upper chest. It will just lift the rib cage up. So we're getting a lot of people with like tight neck, tight shoulders, and maybe problems with the neck. They'll have headaches from some of that tightness in the neck coming up. The breathing poorly during the day will affect how well they can switch off and sleep at night. They'll be snoring at night because they're breathing poorly during the day. And then that sleep then just has a huge effect on then how you feel the next day. And it starts that sort of cascade of events just goes on again the next day. And if you haven't got any sort of tools within your toolbox to help you manage help you manage your stress, but before that, if you haven't got any tools to help you be aware of your body's, like, how's your body actually doing? How do you feel? That's like quite a difficult question to answer for a lot of people. And it certainly was years ago for me. Like, how do you feel? Like, I don't know, feel all right. Like, I don't know. Like, because before, when I played rugby for however many years, it was like, how do you feel? That was purely based on like, how was training yesterday? How basically fucked am I? And am I going to be all right for the weekend? Because that's when the game is. And then, so when you stop playing a game like that, and it's just more like, how are you? How is your body feeling? How is your mind? Like, I don't know. But something that I found personally helpful is that your breathing being linked in with your heart rate, your blood pressure, your nervous system, your breathing. If your breathing is a little bit faster, a little bit heavier, a little bit noisier, like you said, in noticing people's, that's a sign that your body's working harder. And that makes rational sense. And my body's working harder. But what if it's working harder, but I'm just sat down in front of my computer doing no physical activity, but I'm stressed? Like, I can start to now hear my breathing and use that as a bit of an awareness piece, and then practice some of the very simple techniques to take control of that breath and try to slow it down, try to breathe a little less rather than more, to allow your body to be more efficient with what air you are breathing in, so that it can be calmer, so that it can work less at that vital first level foundation of being alive. Is you need to get air in, and if you can get it in a little bit more efficiently, the body is going to be able to do less of it, and therefore be calmer, and then you have more scope to take on external stresses that life is just going to throw at you, because they're always going to come. You can't really change them, but what we can change is how we respond to them. And how we respond to them is one thing, but what's our level of almost like calmness or readiness to deal with additional stresses? That's also something that's in our control before we look at how we actually respond.
I love it. I love how you think, oh, it's because of the work, it's because of this, and it's actually can all be kind of really related down to something we think is automatic. It's like we breathe in, we breathe out, how you're holding your breath, what you're dealing with, like you're dealing with the waste in, the waste out, how you're dealing with the quality of the oxygen in. So you've said in another interview that, we need to pay attention and listen to how our breathing responds to the increase in CO2 produced and the demand for oxygen. What are we looking for in these things? How can we gauge the sort of the quality of the air we're getting in and the CO2 produced? You mentioned there's a video where you talk about the BALT score, for instance.
Yeah, that's a little simple test, yeah.
How can we sort of analyze our breathing and kind of know, like, what are we looking for in terms of good, bad? Like, what would I say a beginner athlete that's thinking, okay, I can definitely improve here? What would you want them to start doing as their sort of tests?
Yeah, there's probably like 3 simple things that we could do. One would be the BALT score. Let's come to that sort of last, because it's probably the most, they're all simple, the most complicated out of the simplest. First, like mechanics, like how are you, what's moving within your body? We have to appreciate that something's got to move to increase volume, which decreases pressure, that gets air in. Like, how are you, what's moving within your body to make that air come in and out? And there's some very simple like high-low tests in terms of putting one hand high, one hand low, and just noticing what parts of your body, is your chest moving more, or is your lower sort of ribs moving more? Appreciating the diaphragm is not in the upper chest, the diaphragm is in the connected to the bottom of that rib cage. And then, or, we can also then go to take the hands onto the outside of those lower ribs. And can you feel some lateral expansion? Can you look at yourself in the mirror whilst you do that? And can you visually see your shoulders and upper chest raising? Or at rest, are they quite calm? And are you able to expand, but a little bit more laterally and three-dimensionally from lower down? So mechanically, trying to breathe more lateral and three-dimensional rather than just vertical and it coming from lower down for those lower portions of the ribs. That'd be something that you could feel with your own hands and look at, video yourself, or just look in the mirror as you're breathing to get some visual cues on that. So that's the mechanics. Two other then ones would be the Bolt score and your respiratory rate. So your respiratory rate is going to be how many breaths you take in a minute. I like to time 30 seconds, count how many breaths you take. In and out is 1 breath. And then you can multiply that by 2 or double it, up to you. That's a joke. People sit, when you do that with a group, I appreciate we're just doing this with one person. When you do that in a group, people, for some reason, I don't think it's that funny, but I said it once, almost by mistake. And everyone thought it was dead funny, so I just use it all the time now. But anyway, you multiply it by 2 and you get your respiratory rate for a minute. That's telling us, like, what's the current cadence speed that your respiratory center is like triggering you to breathe. It will dictate, the respiratory center will dictate the speed at which you breathe, like that rate, and also the size of the breath. And linked into that is going to be our carbon dioxide tolerance, which the Bolt score will give us a measure of. Just before I finish on the respiratory rate, obviously the faster you're breathing, the more inefficient you're being. Being able to breathe less is a sign of being more efficient and being calmer. We want that respiratory rate at rest to be about 10 to 12. Now, when you ask someone to count their breaths and focus on their breathing, they automatically slow it down. Even though we're saying during that one, it's like, just observe your breathing, don't slow it down, don't mess with it, just count your breaths. Just by counting, you automatically slow it down. So if you were, you did that and you were at 16, it might be more like you're at 17 or 18. And, if you're at 8, great, you're doing a great job. You're like under 10. But we want people around about 10 as a sign of just like a good, steady cadence. The Bolt score, which stands for Body Oxygen Level Test, your oxygen uptake being dictated by carbon dioxide within the body, and it's carbon dioxide levels rising that's the primary stimulus for the chemoreceptors that are situated in your brainstem to trigger breathing. And this happens, so if you think of like, if you take a breath in and a breath out, and just pause, after that breath out, there's going to be a certain time frame during that pause where you're going to get the urge to breathe. It's an automatic urge. That's when the chemoreceptors in your brainstem have noticed carbon dioxide levels rising to the point where it feels the pH is getting affected because it makes the blood more acidic, and you need to breathe to get the CO2 out and then get some more oxygen in. The time frame of that pause that you're able to comfortably do without, so it's a normal breath in, a normal breath out through the nose, which should be light, soft and quiet, in, out, and then pause. And without using any willpower, as soon as you get the first definite desire to breathe in, you breathe in, and breathing should be normal. You shouldn't be out of breath. Breathing should be normal because you've not been using any willpower. We're just seeing what is your relaxed state of automatic stimulus to breathe coming to. And, surprisingly for a lot of people, that can be like less than 10 seconds. And we want it to be like 25 seconds and above. In all the research that's been done on these types of, in Buteyko, they call it the control pause. In Oxygen Advantage, we call it the Bolt score. That's what Patrick McKeown called it. In some of the research, they'll call it, just literally call it a relaxed breath hold after an exhale. It's a really exciting name. But they'll take people, and if someone is 25 seconds and above, they're like highly likely that you've got a good tolerance to carbon dioxide and good breathing mechanics, because those things go hand in hand together. Whereas if someone's below 25 seconds, they'll have some level of sensitivity to carbon dioxide and potential patterns for dysfunctional breathing.
It is amazing, like that. Something that can affect so much of our personality, that can make us a better athlete, happier, healthier, etc. It's something we don't even focus on, and we barely know anything. Like, you see people walking up, can barely go up like a steep hill without getting out of breath because of the way they're breathing, and you think, oh, that would never happen to me. But we let it happen to us all the time.
Yeah, but and this is one of the, like, and honestly, because I've been through this, right? So when I sorry, I'm jumping it, but just when I read I got put onto the Oxford Advances, I read it, and it's like explaining all this detail about the benefits of nasal breathing and breathing better, and I'm like, right, I need, like, my Bolt score was like 9 seconds. I was like, this isn't good. I'm exploring this to help continue my rehabilitation from my brain injury. This is something I need to take seriously. So I'm like, right, going out for a run, I'm going to just breathe through my nose. And I got to the end of my street, which is like 50 meters down the road, and there was like snot just pouring into my face. And I'm like, this is
happened to me too.
Unbelievable. This is miserable. And probably for the first time in my life, and probably the only time in my life, my ego didn't actually win that battle. And like, normally, what I would have done would be like, my ego would be like, well, this is rubbish. Like, you're a fit rugby player, Jacko. Like, this must be BS if you can't do it. Whereas I was like, I understand, and I've appreciated the rational, like, explanation of, like, the nose is how we're supposed to breathe. I'm on board with that. I can't use mine. I need to retrain myself to be able to do that. And there's some, where I live, there's some like some steep hills and climbs that there's one very famous one called Bastard Hill. As you can imagine, it's quite a beast. And like, I couldn't walk up that nasal breathing. Now, I literally yesterday, me and Mrs. Jacko, me and the wife, we pulled up at Aberfalls in North Wales, and there was a little run. It feels like I'm training for an ultra marathon, so now I've got to the point where things seem. I described it on the podcast earlier, actually, where someone was like, a little run, but it feels like a little run now to me, because I would never have been able to do this before. But I've got to put it in context. The ultra I'm doing is 135 miles in 3 days around Anglesey Coastal Path in September. So I've got to be able to run for a very long time. So we did a 15K run yesterday, which in that context is small, and people that run ultras will be like, we need to do a lot more work than that, mate. Anyway, but it was 15K, and it was 770 meters to the top of Mount Drum, I think it's called. And we ran up and ran back down. Well, a bit of mixture of running with a little bit of walking. It's pretty steep, as you can imagine, but up and down 770 meters, up and down in 2 hours, and breathing in and out through the nose the whole way, completely controlled, and like, just more than happy. Like, I would have, if you made it, would feel like punishment to make me breathe with my mouth. It just doesn't feel right now. But that's taken a number of years to get to that point. But you recover so much faster because you never lose your breath. It feels so much nicer because you're not as stressed. You're not getting into that like stress response of just heavy mouth breathing. The system is doing less work. Your heart rate stays much lower. I had an interesting one, if I don't mind me sharing, of the other day. In comparison, like the week before, went for a run with my mate. We ran 10K, so a little bit less, and completely flat. And we did therefore run a bit faster pace, but my average heart rate up and down that mountain 700-meter climb was, I think, 130 beats per minute. Whereas running flat 10K with my mate, yes, we were running a bit faster, so it made a difference. But the big thing was we were talking the whole way around. Talking is exhaling out of the mouth. And I was saying to him, I was like, I've not ran chatting with someone for a while. I'd end up running a lot on my own. And I was like, mate, I can't. I feel like, I was like, I want to talk to you because because I enjoy your company. I'm not going to not talk to you. But I'm literally like, feel like I'm losing my breath because we're talking, because I'm doing this mouth breathing. And I looked at my heart rate, and I was at like 160 at some points during that run. And my average for that run was like 152 or something. And it was 100% affected by the mouth breathing that was happening because I was talking. But I wanted to talk to my mate, so I was happy to do that. But it was it was quite surprising because I've not done that for a very long time.
Because it really kind of not scared me, but it kind of impressed me. Like when I was watching, like some of your videos, and like the insanity of like, I'm going to try nasal breathing. So you decided to run a marathon. Like with nasal breathing, it's like, okay, maybe I'm not that crazy, but I mean, it's like little things like
but wait, just on that, like, because everyone gets a bit funny about that sometimes. They're like, how do you run a marathon? Do you run it fast or do you run it very, very slow?
Yeah, it's like
I think
slow. Yeah, you run slow. You don't try to do it fast.
You're not sprinting. Now, sprinting, doing 400 meters nasal breathing would probably be pretty tough. Like sprinting for a long time and working at absolute threshold for a long time nasal breathing, that's tough. Running a marathon nasal breathing is easier than running a marathon mouth breathing because you're running very slow. So airflow isn't a problem. It's not difficult. And it's more efficient. Like it would be far harder to. There's one of the problems I had on my marathon was that I just wanted to chat to everybody. It helps, and I just like talking to people, as you can tell. And it's managing your breathing whilst you're talking is something that I'm needing to. I need some more training partners. So if anyone's out there wants to come, if you come running with me, when I run with my missus, we literally both nasal breathe, so we just don't talk. We may as well be on our own.
But some days it's a relief when I think back to some of my ex-girlfriends. It's like, can we nasal breathe? I mean, there was like one of the tips she gave, which was great, was it was about how not to breathe with your nose, but to actually breathe through your nose. And I was like, what's that mean? And then I tried it while I was going for a wee run, and I was like, it started making sense how it pulled everything up and kind of came through. And I was like, right, I get this now. Why should we? How do we do that? How do we kind of, even if that was something that even just people decided to try now, how can we start working with that concept of, don't breathe with your nose, but we should breathe through the nose, just to kind of get better quality of oxygen in, or like something like that? Is there like a sort of challenges you could set them?
Well, it's trying to get the movement to be driven from the diaphragm. So if I do that, that's me sucking with my nose. And depending on how challenging the exercise intensity is that I'm doing, I'm going to have that urge to breathe like that. But if I am doing that, it's very like, it's still, even though it's through the nose and not through the mouth, it's still like being driven from quite high up, which is going to affect where that air is actually getting to. So if I can drive the breath in coming from the diaphragm, moving down and pushing out, and feel that around my torso, that then allows the nose to be just like the gateway to let the air come in. And that's helping send oxygen and air into the lower portion of the lungs that we were discussing as being more efficient. Like for me, all of it, and not even just breathing, everything starts with awareness. Can you be aware of how you are currently breathing now? Can you be aware of how that changes when exercise demands more of your respiratory system? Because all that's going to happen when you start exercising is the demand for oxygen goes up, the amount of CO2 you create goes up, and your body's got to deal with it. And any dysfunction that's going unnoticed at rest in your automatic breathing gets shown up. Like that's one of the things I love when I go out running. I never even really used to like running, but running, it's not running that when I go out for a run, I'm going out and I'm working on my breath. I'm working on myself. And almost every time you go out running, when you go out running or you go out and do an exercise, and running is good because it's rhythmical. It's the same on the bike. Anything that's quite nice and rhythmical that doesn't require an awful lot of like cognitive attention, because the skill element of running is not, it's not like we're doing something too challenging, that you have some headspace then to focus on another element that's going on. And so for me, I focus on my breath, and I'll I'll just notice. You'll notice things, and it's almost like every time there's something a little bit different. And can I breathe a bit more into the back? And how's my neck feeling? Or how am I managing that airflow? What happens if I do this? How does that feel? And like, it's just an opportunity that you'll feel it an awful lot more when you're running compared to just being sat down at rest. If someone's just listening to this now, sat down nice and relaxed at rest, they might not even barely be able to feel their breathing. And that's a good thing that it's that soft and subtle and silent. But when you start exercising, it will show you. And that's running. That's what running is for me. Running isn't really running. Running is a chance to work on yourself.
I love like how much there is just on breathing. You know, like we haven't even started going into your school yet. We haven't started really kind of tackling like leaving rugby and how you coach people. You know, there's still so much to go in. So we've got to do a round two, because I mean, I'm really interested in this. I love how passionate and stuff you are. Something I was really wanting to get into was you looked into sort of breath work after you had the brain injury when you're playing rugby. And I mean, my brother has had sort of seizures and things like that, so he looked into that similar sort of situation. How did you find breathing relates to our sort of biochemistry, to the brain? You know, because you talk to the MMA fighters about how concussion affects our breathing. You've mentioned like, how does it affect like our ability to go into like flow state, to deal with our focus and things like that? How are the brain and the breathing linked?
I mean, I'm not necessarily like a neurology expert, but I can share the bits I've picked up along the way.
I know it's probably a podcast on its own, to be honest.
Yeah. And there'll be people that can, from a neurology perspective, will be able to give more depth as well. But there's a few things that I've come across that, like, so when I had my brain injury, I had a seizure on the training field as well. So I guess, I can't remember any of it. Luckily, it's one of those good things that you don't remember it. But the respiratory center that's is in the center of the brain, in the brainstem, and when your brain is getting whacked in like a head injury, it's like getting whacked on the inside of the skull, and like I had bruising from it, like hitting on the other side, and you know that brainstem is what it's sort of like rattling on in the middle, and that's getting disrupted, that's getting affected by the vicious sort of whiplashing movements, let's say. And one thing that we notice is that people will become more sensitive to carbon dioxide, and blood flow and oxygen supply to the brain get reduced. So carbon dioxide, so like for me, that my Bolt score was like 9 seconds, which was like very low. That being a sign that my brain wasn't happy with anything more than 9 seconds before it was like, we need to breathe in. Whereas now it might be more like 25, 30, which is quite a significant difference. And carbon dioxide, I mentioned before about circulation and oxygen delivery. Well, that's vital for the brain. The brain will always prioritize itself over everything else because it needs to work. Otherwise, everything else isn't going to work. So when we have adequate, or, you know, when we have, let's talk about the scenario where we've had like me having a brain injury, and then you start being more sensitive to carbon dioxide. So you start breathing faster, and then you start offloading more carbon dioxide. So you become even more sensitive to it. And we stay in this vicious cycle until we do something about it. And when CO2 is then, we're offloading more of it, there's less CO2 in the body. When there's less CO2 in the body, blood vessels constrict, and oxygen stays more tightly bound to hemoglobin in red blood cells. So not only is the oxygen not getting as easily released, it's also circulation isn't as easy. And that blood flow to the brain after a head injury can last for years if nothing's done about it. And that's sort of where I was. And how does that affect how you've got that whole sort of faster breathing rate and more sensitive to carbon dioxide, which will just affect how efficient you can be with your breathing, and therefore just how much more stress the body is under, because it's just working a bit harder to just do that basic element of breathing. But also there's some elements where like cognition, obviously it's going to be effective if there's less oxygen supplied to the brain. But then feelings of like stress and anxiety, we see that people who are more sensitive to carbon dioxide are more prone to panic attacks and anxiety disorders. And they've since found out that carbon dioxide actually helps soothe the irritability of the conscious centers of the brain. So when we are very sensitive to carbon dioxide, we don't have much carbon dioxide in circulation, and the irritability is like not calmed, and we have a racing mind or we have anxious thoughts. And rather than trying to control that, we can try to control those with like, control your thoughts with your own thoughts, or cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like that. But we also need to look at how can we approach it from a, as you said, like a biochemistry perspective. How's that going to affect our breathing? So when we restore better breathing patterns, when we restore sensitivity to carbon dioxide, we get a calming of the mind, if so to speak. We get an improvement in circulation and blood flow to the brain, and importantly, oxygen delivery, as well as our breathing starts to become more efficient.
Oh, I was blown away by it, like just the videos, and now like from your answer, and I know there's a lot of people just now who are going, bloody hell, that's me. That makes so much sense. Yeah. That's affecting me in this way. It's affecting me in that way. So we've really got to do a round two. I know I've taken up, like we've just sort of touched and stuff. I've got questions on about recovery and how do we release anxiety, about breath strips, about like sleeping. There's still so much to go into it. You're such a fascinating guy, and I know we'll kill it. So we've got to do a round two, but.
And you're determined to make me a superstar, aren't you?
I always love that. I mean, I love finding people who are out, like who can go into a topic that are not just dealing with, oh, tell me about your book. And they can just change the name at the top of the interview. And I love like really pushing it and finding people kind of going, oh my God, that's me. And then they go away and it actually changes something about their life. It's not just like, yeah, that was enjoyable. Oh, Love Island's on TV. It's like something they can actually use. And that's why I love your material. It's like, this will help people who are sitting at home dealing with anxiety. It'll help the athlete who's about to go and start prepping and working out to be better. It'll affect somebody that's got bad posture and is wondering, like, why am I struggling with X? And there's just so much to it. And I think that's the thing, is we forget this stuff can be changed. And this is why it's so great to see like yourself bringing this out. What's the plan for the evolution of the brand? What do you want to be? I know you're going to be a superstar, and I keep saying it, and it's going to happen. But what do you want this to be? Like, where do you want to take this? How are you going to link this with your school? How are you going to link in with this? Because we'll give a shout out to that area in a minute. But I've got a whole thing about like how to utilize those kind of movements into your training, etc. But what are you wanting to do with this? How are you going to start coaching this program? How are you going to use your programs to shape people?
There is no master plan. I literally did the instructor training with Patrick McKeown, who's the author of the Oxford Advantage. He's been like pushing the world of breathing for the last sort of like 20-25 years, delving into all the research and developing the framework that we sort of work from. So there's just huge, massive kudos, respect, and love to him. And I did the training to become a coach, not to become a coach, just to understand it better, just so I could basically like help myself, not in a selfish way, but just it was part of me exploring that sort of rehabilitation from a brain injury. It was just as you described then, like how much it impacts us and how much it can impact. There's a little bit of something for everyone is almost what you described, and that's how I feel. And so because everyone is breathing, and if everyone can do it a little bit better, and if I can play a little role in helping some people be able to do that, then it's just a privilege to be able to be part of that. I love working with other coaches, so I love like the mentoring side of it that I've been doing as well. But it's all happened very organically, and there isn't. I don't have a master plan, so I can't really answer the question. I'd love to see it be sort of a normal thing in sport. I'd love it to be something that we teach kids in school that's just as important as maths and English. And yeah, I guess that's, I can't, it's difficult to say too much more than that. I'd like to see more. I don't know whether, I mean, there's a lot of people doing, whether there'll be more breathing coaches. I think it's exciting when people are a voice coach or a dance coach or a yoga teacher, or they're doing something else, and then they learn about the breathing techniques and the oxygen advantage, and then link them into, or they're a massage therapist, and it's like, oh, actually, let's get hands on with the diaphragm as well as teaching you about the breathing. So I get excited to work with people when they're sort of collaborating or merging it with some other element that they're already doing, because then it can get creative, and you can use the framework. And once we understand the breathing and how it affects our physiology and it affects the body, then we're finding sort of like new ways or new avenues to go down and explore it. Same as when we work in a new sport that we haven't worked in before. There's an opportunity to try and apply it in a new context, which tends to open up different sort of doors and avenues to go down.
Because I've seen that, like, when you've worked with like some amazing people, so athletes of all different kind of sports and things like that. And I mean, is it the school? Is it calisthenics or is it calisthenics?
Yeah, school of calisthenics. Yeah.
I think I've been mispronouncing that wrong all day.
Even practicing.
In my head, like, it's just, I keep saying calisthenics, and I don't even know where that's coming from. But I mean, when you did that, you learned a sort of systematic framework to, you use your knowledge of exercise to sort of learn the movements and things like that. And I think that's really interesting, as to, like, when somebody finds out a concept that's maybe left field of what they do, but it can change their life. It's a way of looking at something. Like Jude Hosker's got an amazing book called Crunch Time that anybody can use about dealing with stress and reframing threats as opportunities, and really creating the mindset of a champion. And, like, people are like, oh, I can't believe how I can use that book, and I'm not an athlete. I can't believe I can do this and that. And I know what you mean. It's like when you can tap in and show them how it can improve them and their natural habitat, rather than, you can only do this if you're an athlete, you can only do it with this. And I love how you're utilizing it. But what have you learned from all the different sports, the different athletes, the different types, the teams, and all these sort of things? Mm-hmm. Have you found a kind of, I don't know, like a similarity in what the top performers and how they use your training?
That's an interesting question. So I was going to say, the more I find out about stuff, particularly thinking like human body stuff, the more I'm just like, feel like you just like, crikey, we don't flipping know anything. It's like, yeah, the more you come across, the more it's like, oh, there's just so much more out there. Like, we'd actually, what do we actually really know? But things, I don't know. I think one of the things, I was always quite big into like the sports psychology side of things, particularly in my own rugby, because I found my own career, because I found parts of it quite challenging mentally, and I think that that's one of the things. I work with a snooker player at the moment, and he's long said, like, those of us in the top 50 or whatever, it's like in the the top guys, he goes, skill wise, like, everyone can pop anything. It's just mentally who can do it on the day and under the pressure, and sort of understanding what pressure does to us in performance. I think that's what separates those that are, really end up standing out regardless of the sport. That's the mindset of the individuals. I've been very privileged to work with a number of Paralympic athletes that will bring another whole new dimension to that sort of mindset as well. yeah, that's probably the thing I'd say of regardless of who you're working with, is mindset.
Because I can't think of a sport, a discipline, an industry where better breathing isn't going to benefit them. And I think that's it. Must be amazing to be able to shape and change so many lives. Did you struggle when you left rugby with losing that identity of being the professional athlete? And has the kind of working with people and going down this rabbit hole into like the oxygen advantage and things like that, has that completely changed you? Do you ever miss the rugby, or are you now so into how deep you can go with this?
I mean, I was lucky in that I was towards the end of my rugby career. I was 31. I just signed a new 2-year contract, but that was probably going to be my last one. And so I was 31 when that happened back in 2013. So I'd had a long career, and actually the main thing was relief when I had to retire. I'd spent I had the injury and training in August, and then saw the specialist that said I needed to retire in the December. So I'd spent quite a few months trying to get back to playing, but I was ultimately quite scared of. I was scared of being given the all clear to go and play again because I knew I wasn't right, but I wasn't sort of strong enough or had enough courage to actually put my hand up and just say, look, regardless of what anyone says, I know I'm not right. I didn't do that. And I guess I wish I had done. I could have saved a bit of heartache along the way. But there was a huge amount of relief for me. And then, I was very lucky that I've made the recovery I've made. Like I've made a full recovery, seemingly. There's some stuff that we won't necessarily know until a bit later in life. But I've done some work with Headway charity, and met a lot of people there that, their lives are forever changed, and, their personality forever changed, and challenges in just day-to-day life because of their brain injury. So I was very lucky and blessed, and ultimately what happened to me has sent me down this route, and I couldn't imagine now not doing this, or I couldn't imagine it being any other way. So now I'm grateful for it, and I don't miss. Almost like it seems so long ago that I can't even imagine playing rugby. I can close my eyes and remember like bits of games and things, and the main thing you miss the lads. Everyone says that. You miss the lads. And you get bits of that in potentially other walks of life, but life just moves on, whether you like it or not. It just moves on. Like my dad passed away last month.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so but just to give an example, and it was really sad. It was really sad. And that doesn't even seem real now, but saying it out loud probably tries to help me process it a bit. But you don't want life to go on, or you want to stop and you want to go back, but it just doesn't. Life just carries on regardless of whatever you want to happen. The sun will go down, it will rise again the next day, and life just sort of just drags you along, and it keeps dragging you until you sort of can gather your own, sort of get back on your own feet and get yourself going again. And it's one of the beauties of life. You don't actually have to do anything. You just have to you're just part of that process, whether you want to be or not. And it was that was whether I wanted to carry on playing rugby or not, it wasn't going to happen. And so something's going to change, and whether I'm kicking and screaming or whatever, like tomorrow is going to come, and that process is going to carry on happening. And so
it's almost like the universe was like kind of pushing you into that situation of this is what you're here for, to help people. And, because you certainly have the passion for it, you certainly have the focus and the desire to help, and you're changing lives. Yeah. And it's amazing to see. I mean, I know we're well over our time limit, so apologies for taking out your time, but what would you want people to take from this before we can get around to it? What would you want them to sort of look at as in terms of if there was a go-home message or something to take from this interview?
Shut your mouth and breathe through your nose.
I love it.
Breathe
That's
through your
awesome.
nose and breathe quietly. You know, you said that like universe, you can sort of call it what you want, like I believe in God, like, and have definitely been directed into this position, and where it goes next, you know, what tomorrow will bring, who knows, and where, because if I look back 10 years ago, I would, and you said, "Oh, what are you going to be doing in 10 years?" I wouldn't be able to tell you this because I didn't even know this existed. So, what I'm going to be in another 10 years, who knows? But hopefully, I'll still be breathing, and hopefully, it will still be through my nose, and hopefully, it'll still be quiet.
And you'll still be changing lives. I know that for a fact. And how can people keep in touch with you? How can we like sign up for the training? How can we connect with you on social media? How can we find your videos like on the Bolt test and things like that?
So probably social media, like Instagram. So my Instagram's jacko.david.jackson. And I've got an app come out just recently. There's a free foundations course on that, which is Pro Breathwork. So you can go to probreathwork.com, or you can just search Pro Breathwork in the App Store or in Google Store. And the foundations course is absolutely free. I think there's about 6 or 7 modules to work through, some videos and some breathing exercises to follow along. Gets you sorted with all, you know, there's something there for everyone. And made it free, want it to be free because it's, you know, breathing is free, and you having the information to be able to do it a little bit more efficiently, I believe, should be free as well.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.